When hatred threatens to tear a community apart, one man's resilience and quiet strength become the catalyst for redemption and lasting change. In the small, unassuming town of Pine Ridge, Jeremiah Carter had built a life of peace and solitude. A former Navy SEAL with an illustrious career, he had chosen to retire early to focus on a quieter, more meaningful existence. Jeremiah's house, a modest but well-kept cabin on the edge of a dense forest, stood as a testament to his hard work and dedication. He spent his days helping at the local community center and mentoring troubled youth, keeping his extraordinary past hidden from everyone except his closest friend, Pastor Thomas. Jeremiah's quiet demeanor and kindness earned him respect from some, but suspicion from others. Pine Ridge was a town with deep roots and, unfortunately, darker undercurrents of prejudice. Jeremiah's presence as a black man in a predominantly white town was enough to provoke the ire of those who clung to outdated beliefs. One group in particular saw Jeremiah as a threat. Led by a man named Kyle Riggs, a small gang of locals had grown increasingly vocal and hostile toward Jeremiah. They didn't know his past. They didn't care. All they saw was someone they deemed an outsider. The harassment began subtly, almost innocuously. It started with Jeremiah finding litter scattered across his yard, beer cans and fast food wrappers that clearly hadn't blown in by accident. At first, he thought it might be careless teenagers, but the incidents escalated. One morning, Jeremiah woke to find graffiti scrawled across his wooden fence, slurs and symbols meant to intimidate. He calmly painted over them without a word. Then came the slashed tires on his truck, followed by a rock hurled through his living room window late at night. The message was clear. Someone wanted him gone. Jeremiah reported each incident to the local sheriff, a man named Deputy Mills, who always responded with a dismissive shrug. "Boys will be boys," Mills said. "Probably just some kids blowing off steam. No real harm done, right?" Jeremiah knew better, but he kept his composure. Years of discipline had taught him patience, even in the face of blatant injustice. Still, the tension weighed on him. One evening, he sat on his front porch, staring out at the dark forest beyond his property. His old friend, Pastor Thomas, arrived with a thermos of coffee and a concerned look. "You've got to stand up to them, Jeremiah," Thomas said, lowering himself onto the porch steps beside him. The pastor's voice was steady, but laced with worry. "The more you let them push, the bolder they'll get. They're trying to scare you, but you can't let them win." Jeremiah's deep voice carried a calm strength. "I've fought enough battles, Thomas. This isn't one I'm looking for." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I understand that, but these men, they don't think like you or me. They see kindness as a weakness. They see silence as permission. You can't fight them the way you fought enemies overseas, but you've got to stand firm." Jeremiah nodded slowly. He respected Thomas's advice, but remained resolute in his approach. "I'll handle it my way," he said. "No violence, no escalation. Just patience. They'll grow tired eventually." Thomas's eyes searched Jeremiah's face, looking for any sign of doubt. He found none. Reluctantly, he patted his friend on the shoulder and stood. "If you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." As the pastor walked back to his car, Jeremiah stayed on the porch, the stars above casting faint light across the forest. His mind wandered to his past, to missions in hostile territories where threats had been far deadlier. He had survived those. Surely he could survive this. But deep down, he knew Thomas was right. This was a battle of a different kind, and it was only just beginning. The night was still and eerily quiet, with only the sound of crickets breaking the silence. Jeremiah sat in his darkened cabin, reading under the soft glow of a table lamp. He had spent the evening reflecting on his life, unaware that danger was closing in. Outside, a group of shadows moved silently through the trees, carrying bottles filled with gasoline and makeshift wicks. Kyle Riggs and his gang had come to deliver their final message. At first, Jeremiah noticed only the faint smell of gasoline wafting through the air. Then, the sound of glass shattering broke the quiet, followed by an explosion of fire. One of the gang's Molotov cocktails had hit his truck, sending flames roaring into the night. The gang erupted into cheers, emboldened by the sight of destruction. They hurled more Molotovs toward the cabin, their laughter and hateful slurs echoing through the forest. Flames licked the sides of the wooden structure, spreading quickly as the dry timber caught fire. Inside, Jeremiah's senses sharpened. He had spent years suppressing the instincts honed during his time as a Navy SEAL. But now, those instincts surged back with undeniable force. He remained calm, methodically retrieving a go bag he had prepared long ago. While the gang believed him to be trapped and powerless, Jeremiah slipped out through a hidden exit that led into the forest. From the shadows, Jeremiah observed the gang as they continued their assault. His sharp eyes and tactical mind took in every detail, their positions, their weapons, and their overconfidence. They were so consumed by their hatred and sense of victory that they failed to notice the predator lurking just beyond the firelight. Jeremiah's heart pounded, but not from fear. This was a battlefield, and he was in his element. His movements were silent, each step deliberate, as he closed the distance between himself and his attackers. Years of training had taught him patience and precision, and now those lessons came to life. As the gang celebrated, Jeremiah struck. He moved with the speed and efficiency of a ghost, taking out the first two members before they could react. A sharp twist of the wrist disarmed one, while a calculated strike rendered another unconscious. The remaining members froze in shock, their laughter turning to shouts of confusion and fear. "What the hell's going on?" Kyle Riggs shouted, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound authoritative. He clutched a crowbar, scanning the darkness for signs of the unseen assailant. Jeremiah stepped into the flickering light, his imposing figure framed by the glow of the burning cabin. His eyes locked on Kyle, cold and unyielding. "You think you can destroy what I've built?" he said, his voice low and steady. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The gang hesitated, fear taking hold as they realized they were no longer the hunters but the prey. One by one, they charged at Jeremiah, desperate to regain control of the situation. But they were no match for his skill and discipline. Each attack was countered with precise and devastating efficiency. Within moments, the gang lay scattered and defeated, groaning in pain. Kyle, the last man standing, dropped his crowbar and fell to his knees. His bravado was gone, replaced by sheer terror. Jeremiah loomed over him, his presence commanding and unrelenting. "This is your only warning," Jeremiah said. "Leave, confess, or face the consequences. The choice is yours." Kyle nodded frantically, his fear overwhelming him. Jeremiah stepped back, allowing the man to scramble away into the night. As the flames of the cabin continued to burn, Jeremiah stood tall, unshaken. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. The reckoning is the turning point where Jeremiah shifts from a passive observer to an active force of justice. After witnessing the gang's destruction of his property, he resolves to confront them head-on. The part unfolds as a gripping sequence of tactical precision and psychological dominance, showcasing Jeremiah's Navy SEAL training and unyielding determination. As the gang revels in their perceived victory, Jeremiah silently moves through the forest surrounding his property. He uses the cover of darkness and his intimate knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. Each step is calculated, his movements as silent as a shadow. The gang, drunk on their hatred and overconfidence, fails to notice the predator stalking them. Jeremiah strikes with the precision of a seasoned warrior. The first two members of the gang are taken down before they even realize what's happening. He disarms one with a swift, fluid motion, using the man's own weapon against him. Another is incapacitated with a well-placed strike, leaving him unconscious on the ground. Jeremiah's actions are efficient and controlled, every move honed by years of training and battlefield experience. As confusion spreads among the remaining gang members, fear begins to replace their earlier bravado. Kyle Riggs, the gang's leader, shouts orders in a desperate attempt to maintain control, but his voice betrays his growing panic. Jeremiah steps into the firelight, his imposing figure casting long shadows. His calm, piercing gaze locks onto Kyle, and his measured voice cuts through the chaos. "You think you can destroy what I've built? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The gang members, emboldened by numbers but lacking the skill to back it up, attempt to rush him. Jeremiah remains composed, countering their attacks with practiced precision. He uses their momentum against them, turning their aggression into their downfall. Each strike is deliberate, each move a reminder that they are facing someone far beyond their understanding. Within minutes, the gang lies scattered, groaning in pain and utterly defeated. Only Kyle remains standing, clutching a crowbar with trembling hands. Jeremiah approaches him with deliberate slowness, his presence radiating authority and unshakable confidence. The once defiant leader now quivers in fear, his bravado completely shattered. Jeremiah seizes the moment to deliver a final warning. He offers Kyle a choice: to leave and never return, confess to the authorities, or face consequences far worse than anything he can imagine. The ultimatum is delivered with chilling calm, a reminder that Jeremiah's mercy has its limits. Kyle, overwhelmed by fear, stammers out his agreement and scrambles away, leaving his defeated comrades behind. Redemption and revelation is where Jeremiah's actions lead to significant change, not just for himself, but for the community around him. It's a story of accountability, justice, and Jeremiah's emergence as a protector and catalyst for change in Pine Ridge. After the gang's defeat, Jeremiah ensures the incapacitated members are secured and left for the authorities to find. He retrieves his phone and contacts Pastor Thomas, explaining everything. Thomas, ever the voice of reason, agrees to call the state police, bypassing the ineffectual local sheriff, Deputy Mills. Jeremiah knows that justice cannot rely on a system controlled by people like Mills, who have ignored his pleas for help. When the state police arrive the next morning, they are met with a scene that speaks volumes. The gang members, bruised and bound, are surrounded by evidence of their crimes: Molotov cocktail remnants, spray paint cans, and weapons. Jeremiah presents his case calmly and methodically, providing video footage from hidden cameras he had discreetly installed around his property weeks earlier, anticipating the gang's escalation. Kyle Riggs, the gang leader, is forced to confront his actions. Under interrogation, he breaks down and admits to the harassment campaign, implicating Deputy Mills as an enabler who turned a blind eye to their crimes. The revelation shocks the community, exposing the systemic prejudice that had allowed such behavior to persist. As the truth comes to light, the townspeople are divided. Some remain stubborn in their biases, but others, ashamed of their complicity or indifference, begin to rally around Jeremiah. Pastor Thomas organizes a community meeting, using the incident as a wake-up call for Pine Ridge. He implores the townsfolk to reject hatred and fear and work toward healing and unity. Jeremiah, reluctant at first, becomes a symbol of resilience and change. His quiet strength and integrity win over even some of his harshest critics. He continues to mentor troubled youth, many of whom see him as a role model, not just for his strength, but for his ability to rise above hatred without succumbing to it. Meanwhile, the justice system takes its course. Kyle and his gang face significant charges, while Deputy Mills is removed from his position and placed under investigation. A new sheriff, one with a reputation for fairness, is brought in to restore trust in law enforcement. Jeremiah rebuilds his cabin with the help of community members who volunteer their time and resources as a gesture of atonement. The scars of the attack remain, but so does the resolve to ensure such an incident never happens again. Jeremiah's past as a Navy SEAL becomes known, but instead of seeing him as a threat, the town begins to view him as an asset, a protector who values peace but will stand firm when justice demands it. In the aftermath of the attack and the revelations it uncovered, Pine Ridge began to slowly change. The once hidden prejudices within the town were no longer a secret. The exposure of Deputy Mills's corruption and the gang's hate-fueled actions forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. Pastor Thomas took the lead in facilitating open discussions at the church, encouraging townspeople to reflect on their biases and work toward unity. Jeremiah, who had never sought the spotlight, found himself at the heart of this transformation. Despite the trauma he had endured, Jeremiah approached the rebuilding of his life with the same discipline and resolve that had carried him through his years as a Navy SEAL. With the help of volunteers, his cabin was reconstructed, better and stronger than before. Each nail hammered into the wood, each brushstroke of paint, felt like a symbolic act of resilience, a defiant statement that hatred would not prevail. Jeremiah's decision to stay in Pine Ridge surprised many. Some had expected him to leave, to seek peace elsewhere after such a harrowing experience. But Jeremiah saw an opportunity to make a lasting impact. "Running won't solve anything," he explained to Pastor Thomas one evening as they sat on the new porch, sipping coffee. "If I leave, it's just a victory for fear. This town needs to change, and I can help." He deepened his involvement with the local youth, expanding his mentorship program to include workshops on self-discipline, teamwork, and leadership. Many of the young people who attended saw Jeremiah as a role model, not just because of his military background, but because of his unwavering commitment to peace and justice. He often told them, "Strength isn't about how much you can fight, it's about knowing when to." The community began to follow his example. Some of the town's most vocal critics of Jeremiah came forward with apologies, humbled by his forgiveness. Others, inspired by his resolve, joined efforts to promote inclusivity and fairness. A few stubborn voices clung to their prejudices, but they found themselves increasingly isolated as the majority of Pine Ridge rallied behind a vision of unity. The gang members who had attacked Jeremiah faced justice in court, with Kyle Riggs receiving the harshest sentence. Deputy Mills, too, was held accountable for his role in enabling the gang's actions. Their downfall served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what happens when hatred goes unchecked. For Jeremiah, moving forward meant balancing his past and present. He opened up more about his Navy SEAL background, sharing stories not to glorify violence, but to teach lessons about discipline, resilience, and the importance of community. He became a sought-after speaker at local schools and civic events, where his quiet, commanding presence left a lasting impression. On the first anniversary of the attack, the townspeople organized a gathering at Jeremiah's property. They planted a tree near his cabin, a symbol of growth and renewal. Jeremiah, touched by the gesture, addressed the crowd with humility. "This tree isn't just for me," he said. "It's for all of us. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the roots of hatred might go, we can always plant something stronger." As the seasons changed, Pine Ridge began to reflect the spirit of that gathering. The scars of the past didn't disappear, but they became a part of the town's story, a reminder of how far it had come. Jeremiah continued his quiet life, tending to his land, mentoring the next generation, and standing as a pillar of strength and wisdom.